This is the Connected Baby podcast series, sponsored by you, the listener. If you'd like to help spread the message of the science of connection even further, then you can make a donation at connectedbaby.net/donate.
Welcome to the Connected Baby podcast, where we explore how people are putting the science of connection to use in their lives.
Welcome to our weekly Connected Baby podcast with Dr. Suzanne Zeedyk. I'm Gary Robinson. Today we have a very special guest who's joining us from Cheltenham, which is a lovely part of the world. Hello, Tamsyn Jenkins. How are you?
Hello.
It's lovely to have you today, Tamsyn. Thank you.
Thank you.
I love these sort of interviews, and I'll tell you for why. Where in this series, we talk to a lot of professionals who come at this from a very professional and a practical point of view. And from time to time, we meet somebody like you, Tamsyn, who is willing to talk about a personal thing, which lots and lots of people who are listening to this can relate to. Because you've got a very personal story to tell us today, and I'm hoping that you're willing to share that with us.
Absolutely, yeah.
And also how the understanding of the science of connection has helped you and where you are now, because there is light at the end of the tunnel. So we're going to go on a wee journey in this podcast.
A courageous journey.
It is indeed, and it is courageous. And thank you for being with us. So let's begin by asking, why did you want to be interviewed, Tamsyn? Why did you want to be interviewed today?
I think it's because listening to Susan, it's really helped me put into context what happened to me as a baby, and to stop feeling that sort of resentment or anger at my parents that I hadn't really realised was in the background, and also to realise sort of why I have difficulties making relationships, where my depression comes from, and things like that.
Well, can we go back to the very beginning, to that first point you made? And if you could tell me and the listener, what was that early part? So what happened in those early days, if you like? What was your situation?
Well, early days. I shouldn't really be here. I think that's the crux of it. I was delivered 8 weeks premature. I was born flat, so I couldn't breathe unaided, and I was taken straight to SCIBU. And they weren't sure whether I was going to live or not. I was intubated, drips inserted, and put into an incubator. The second day, my lung collapsed, and they inserted a chest drain without anaesthetic. And my mother, although she couldn't touch me, could see that I was going blue. She could see the pain on my face. She could see the freeze reaction. And said, you're hurting her. She's in pain. And they were going, no. Babies can't feel pain. How
long ago was this? So if we put this in perspective, how long ago was this, if you don't mind me asking?
It's 37 years ago now.
37 years ago. So do you know what? In the grand scheme of things, not that long ago.
No.
And we were saying this.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
That babies can't feel pain.
Yeah.
They won't remember it,
right.
was the idea.
Sorry, I didn't mean to stop the flow there, Tamsyn. Please pick up.
So from there, my breathing was very difficult. It kept stopping. When the alarm used to go off on the incubator, the nurses would come along and kick it. And the jolt and the bang would cause me to jump, and that would start my breathing up again. I had no sucking reflex, so I had a nasal gastric tube inserted. And I started to get a little better, and by the 7th day, Mum was able to hold my hand for the first time, but just my hand. And she spent a lot of that time just at the incubator saying, I'm sorry, I am so sorry. And it wasn't that she was sorry that she brought me into this world, but she was sorry to see what I was going through. But we were yet to know that there was more to come, unfortunately. Whilst I was improving, I was moved to a special cot, and I became poorly. Quite a few babies on the unit became poorly with something called necrotizing endocolitis, which very grimly, it's a bug that causes your lower intestine to die and rot. So I was then taken to theatres. I had an emergency colostomy. They weren't sure whether I was going to live or die. So again, Mum's in that turmoil. She can't touch me. She's frightened of holding me. Am I going to break in half because the cut goes from hip to hip? And they just weren't sure. They said, it's 50-50. She might survive the night. We're not sure. I then started to get a bit better, but not as they would have liked. So in the end, they packed me off and said, we can't do much else for her now, so off you go. And basically the gist Mum got was that she was taking me home to die. But fortunately proved them wrong. And at 9 months I had the colostomy reversed. I've got horrendous scarring, mentally and physically, from it all. But Suzanne's work and that has really helped me understand things. And, it's been a massive help.
Probably, like me, people that are listening to this have lots and lots of questions. I think the first thing to ask then, the stories and how you've just relayed your experience to us, was that something that your mother told you? And when did she share this knowledge with you, this information?
Fortunately, she kept partly a diary. So I suppose she had a record of me. And I asked the question when I was in my 20s because I wanted to know whether I could get pregnant or not with this scar across my middle. And I've got quite extensive scarring on my hands and my foot where the drips were inserted. And so I said to her, please, can you tell me what happened so I can try and understand this, where I've come from, what makes me me? And from that, I made my own sort of picture journal with the notes that she gave me so I could try and piece together where I've come from. And that's really helped. And I can see why they suggest that for adopted children now.
Was your father around?
Not really. He used the bottle more to cope.
Okay. So that's another side to the story.
Yep.
Another side to the story. Suzanne, I've got a question for you.
Yes.
There was no mother-baby contact for 7 days.
Yep.
How damaging is that?
Babies come into the world with brains expecting interaction. That's what the science of connection tells us. And if you don't have that, it's scary. Now, we didn't know that 37 years ago as clearly as we do now. So the staff that were working with Tamsyn will have been working with the knowledge that they had at the time, and they didn't think it would matter. What we know now is that matters. So the lack of physical contact will have... What word do we use? Is damage too strong? We'll have damaged Tamsyn. Tamsyn, do you think damage is too strong a word?
No, I don't think so, because as I've said to you in previous emails, I find being cuddled very difficult. I find it very restrictive and actually prefer having my hand held.
So let's think about that. You have a baby who came into the world early, whose mother is terribly upset because she can't help her baby. And you have staff who are doing their best, but they're actually hurting the baby, partly because they have to, because of all of the implements that they're using. But there are things that will have been done that made it even worse for Tamsyn because people didn't know that they would be creating lasting pain. You have a woman who survived. That's amazing. But she doesn't like being cuddled. I think that's important to think about what's a life like if you don't like being cuddled. Tamsyn, would you like to feel more comfortable being cuddled?
Oh, I would. I would.
So Tamsyn's brain is wired with something that she wants, but that is physiologically scary for her. That's a harder life. The whole point of Connected Baby is to think about what we know about the science, that could make people's lives better in little simple ways? Are there things that the staff could have done that even in the midst of all that pain could have left Tamsyn open to feeling comfortable being cuddled?
Tamsyn, at the top of the podcast, you mentioned very briefly about the relationship with your mother. Did you blame your mother for any of this?
I didn't so much blame her. I suppose in first instance, I probably blame my dad because he was never there.
Yeah.
And I always thought it was his fault for not being a decent father. And it wasn't until I started reading deeply about attachment and the freeze response to trauma and stuff that it really started to make sense.
Tamsyn, tell us about when you went back to look at photographs of you as a baby and how that helped you to really get this.
Yeah, a lot of it was heartbreaking because there were lots of photos taken. My elder brother didn't survive as a baby, so I was baby number 2 and very precious. So there were lots of photos taken of me just in case. And Dad was also an amateur photographer, very keen. And I had hundreds to go through, even, negatives and stuff. And there are very few that I found that I was actually looking at anybody. And there is just the one that I found where Mum is allowed to cuddle me for the first time. And that was on about day 10. And I think if I magnify that photo, I could convince myself that I am looking at her. Although my face looks very pained, I am trying to make that eye contact with her.
So what that tells us is that we have a baby who comes into the world experiencing relationships with other people as painful and lonely. And what the science of connection now tells us is that that will have been wired into Tamsyn's brain. Mm-hmm. And she's dealing with that even today. What's life like if your brain tells you that people are dangerous? And so the fact that Tamsyn had hundreds of photographs to go through and could find none where the baby is looking at her mother is significant. That's what the science tells us. And if we look at all the photographs that are very common, in fact, we have had this exhibition of stories of connection, and it was full of babies looking deeply into their mother's eyes minutes after birth. That's not what happened for Tamsyn. And I think it's really striking, Tamsyn. You can hear in your voice when you just told us that story how precious it was to you to find one photograph where you were actually looking at your mother. What did it mean to find that?
Oh, it meant loads, because Mum and I are just so close and such good friends. Even though I feel like I can't cuddle her and I wish I could, it meant the world just to find that one that said, yes, you are connected to your mother.
So you obviously attended a lecture or a workshop by Suzanne. Did you have a Eureka moment at that point? Did it happen then, or did it happen gradually as you were reading books about connection, or was it something in particular that struck you about what Suzanne was saying during that lecture?
It was very much a Eureka moment when she was talking about the saber-toothed tigers. So much so I now have a cuddly one sat on top of my computer. And it was the image that Susan presented of this little baby being in an incubator but surrounded by these saber-toothed tigers. And it's just like Susan was able to describe that anxiety that I constantly fear when I experience when I'm interacting with anyone and everybody. And it was like, yes, that's what I was. I was a small, defenseless baby, and I was surrounded by all these tigers. And when I find some situations are getting difficult or interactions are getting a little threatening, say within my family, now that they've read Susan's book, I can simply say to them, "You're turning into a saber-toothed tiger," and they back off.
Tamsyn, do you know what that, how deeply that strikes me? Because the saber-toothed tiger language isn't very professional. And sometimes my colleagues are a bit worried that I'm not keeping this very scientific by using language like saber-toothed tigers and teddy bears. But there's something about it that helps people really to get it. And I think it's amazing that family members could read a really simple book because it's not very thick, and yet it's changed the way your family is able to hear your pain and anxiety more. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
And when was it that I came and trained? So how recently was this in your life?
It was June or July.
So,
Wow. Wow.
So that's what? That's
couple of months.
2 or 3 months ago. So.
Yes.
As of this recording.
So you're 37 years old.
Yeah.
And you've carried the interactions that you have all these years, and yet something has changed in the last few months, remarkably.
Yeah.
Can we talk about your mum for just a second? Because you said something very striking about the hospital sent you home with mum to possibly die. I mean, that's how blunt that was. But your mother obviously cared for you enormously over that 9-month period to turn your health around. She seems like a really strong lady, is she?
Yes, she's an incredibly strong lady. She's had her own battles with life and death herself, and come through them. And I can't praise her highly enough. She is my super mum and my soulmate.
And how do you think it affected your mother psychologically?
Oh, hugely. She's always felt guilty at what happened, how she couldn't intervene, how she couldn't help. She was totally helpless to help her baby. There's just so much impact that it's had on her, especially when the nurse, when I had my surgery, said to her, "You can take her stitches out because I've got to nurse her all night long. She can hate you because you can go home." And I think, that there's always been that sort of guilt feeling that, I don't want to hurt my baby. Yeah. And she always found it difficult that as a child, I never cuddled her. And first day at preschool, it's like, yeah, bye, Mum. And it was like, well, what have I done wrong? Why aren't you cuddling me? Why don't you love me or miss me? That there wasn't that separation anxiety that she would have expected.
And so what Tamsyn's describing there is avoidant attachment patterns, if we want a fancy title for it. In fact, it may even, if you have a lot of trauma, it can lead to disorganized attachment. And so if we use fancy standard attachment language, which some people listening to this might have been trained in, it gives you official title for that. But you don't have to have all that official language to begin to get why Tamsyn might have been afraid of relationships and not really missing people. It's because she had learned that they are dangerous. And if a child reacts that way, it has an impact on the parent. They have feelings about it too.
We talk regularly about brain development and about the percentages of how the brain is formed after 1 year and 3 years, 90% after 3 years and so on. But let's go to your teenage years, because regardless of how your brain's developed, your emotions as a teenager are all over the place.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Without a doubt. So just briefly, if you can, Tamsyn, tell me a little bit about your teenage years, can you?
Teenage years, I started to get sick, I suppose is the word. I was diagnosed with ME at 15, but discussing it with friends and family later on, we suspect that was probably my first episode of anxiety and depression because of the changes that are coming about when you are a teenager. I had to have my first lot of revision surgery. Exams are coming up. You're looking at your body image. You're looking at social groups when you're a teenager. You're looking at your personal identity. And there's those issues. And yeah, that's really when the anxiety and depression, I suppose, started to kick off.
And it's no secret, because you've been very public about this. You had difficulty making friends. However, pets were your first love.
Oh, they were. They didn't answer back, and they always gave nice cuddles that didn't suffocate you.
Now, isn't
and
that
they
interesting?
Always listened.
Isn't that interesting? Pick up on that, Suzanne.
So, cuddles that suffocate you. So, Tamsyn's experience of people is scary, which is why she has trouble cuddling now, because her brain will, even if she wants to, her brain will be going, danger, 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 danger. So they fill her with a hormone, cortisol, and that makes her push people away. It's easy to go all the way back to that time in the incubator and wonder what impact it would have had on her experience of other people. And picking up on little tiny phrases like that makes us think that. And can I also add, it makes total sense that that difficulties would have shown up in adolescence, because that's when your brain is undergoing a rewiring, and that's when lots of mental health difficulties show up in adolescence, because it picks up on old fragilities that we had when we were a child. And there's a whole epidemic of mental health issues for our adolescents at the moment. Tamsyn's story helps us to put all those links together.
There is while we're talking a little bit about doom and gloom at the moment, there is a bright side to this story, and we're going to come onto that in just a second.
Oh, that's good.
Because we want people who are listening to this, who are maybe going through particularly young mums and dads who may have children in baby care units as we speak. There is light at the end of the tunnel, and we're going to come to that in just a second. I'm intrigued that just to find out a little bit more about personal relationships, Tamsyn, and how friends. I know you had difficulty making friends and maybe getting together with future partners. What was their reaction to you? Because obviously, they wouldn't really, I would imagine, they wouldn't understand the science behind this. Even 20 odd years ago. So what was the reaction of people to you when you could seem quite standoffish?
I don't know, because I think as sort of a teenager, you don't sort of reflect on those things. I was very fortunate that I went to a very caring secondary school, and I got into a wonderful group of friends in sixth form, and we are still all friends. We all meet up every year. And although I'm still shy and quiet when we first meet up, their warmth and sort of their forgiveness and patience, I then start to warm up and then come to again. But yeah, I tended to have just a very small, select few friends that they were really real confidence I could trust in. So
that means that Tamsyn has a group of people where she feels safe, but that a lot of other people Tamsyn doesn't feel quite so safe in. Is that right, Tamsyn?
Yes.
That's
totally.
Total attachment, science connection stuff.
And how's your career been affected, if at all?
I have to be careful of burnout. I do with that. I mean, I had to leave the NHS after 10 years simply because I just felt I was never good enough. No matter what I did, it was never going to be to the expected standard. I was never going to be good enough. And in some ways, I cared too much for the people that I looked after. And at the same time, it didn't help. Mum got cancer. So I recognised I was burning out. I was using all the wrong coping techniques. And so I was very fortunate that my husband said, look, your happiness is worth more than money. Quit. Wow. So that's what I did.
Well, listen, let's look at what you're most proud of from all those achievements, despite everything that you've been through. Just tell me what are you really proud of at this moment in time?
I think it would have to be my marriage. You read all about this attachment theory and how it's difficult to form relationships. and maintain relationships. But I've been very fortunate that I met my husband at school. We maintained our relationship through university. We got engaged whilst at different universities. And after 15 years, we're still married and been together for 21.
And so Tamsyn has managed to find relationships that she can feel safe in, which is, we need to celebrate that, but we need to also not take it for granted, because most interactions with people are actually a scary thing for Tamsyn. Is that right, Tamsyn?
Absolutely.
And so we need to take seriously how tricky relationships can be and celebrate it where it happens.
That said, though, it does appear, Tamsyn, that you have learned very quickly how to handle your own tigers.
Yes and no. There's still a road to go down, I think. I still think there's some learning to be done. It would be nice to, as Susan say, be able to accept a cuddle and be more trusting of some people. But within my family unit and my unit of friends, yes, there's been a massive improvement. Yeah.
I love that Tamsyn's given me a new phrase. She now talks about being in the tiger's den. And that's entirely your phrase, Tamsyn. I love that.
Final point with you, Tamsyn, if you wouldn't mind, as we wrap up the podcast. To anybody who's listening to this, whose child may be in a baby care unit at the moment, or ill or facing whatever challenge it may be, what would you say to that parent, those parents?
I'd say, talk to the staff, any opportunity, obviously being mindful of what their care is, but hold them, love them. Just let them know that you're there through touch as well as through words. Actions do speak more than words.
That's great advice, and it really still applies, because there are lots of staff in special care baby units who don't yet know about the science of connection. So there's lots of ways we can yet improve our practice there, which is hopeful for the parents who are sitting outside SCIBU incubators.
Tamsyn Jenkins, thank you for sharing your story so honestly with us today, and I hope we get to talk in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tamsyn.
Thank you.
This was a GRC production for Connected Baby.